My name's Kelly Tebow, and I'm with the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, and I will be your organizer for this evening. I would like to welcome you to our session on when to worry about your child's worries. Thank you all for joining us. Before I have my colleague introduce the speaker for tonight, I'm going to cover some housekeeping items with you. All participants are muted. If you have a question, please type it in the bottom of your question box and click send. You may send questions during the webinar. However, we will have Dr. Bubrick answer the questions at the end of his presentation. We will get to as many queries as time allows. In addition, tonight's presenter is available to take your questions on the Wednesday webinar blog, which is accessed from our homepage under the heading Programs. This blog will be monitored for the next 7 days. Answers will be archived for future reference. If you missed any part of the presentation or would just like to watch it again, an archived version will be posted to our website. We value your input. In order to expand the webinar experience in the future, we need everyone to fill out the survey as you exit the webinar. The New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome and Associated Disorders, its directors and employees assume no responsibility for the accuracy, completeness, objectivity, or usefulness of information presented. We do not endorse any recommendation or opinion made by any member or physician, nor do we advocate for any treatment. You are responsible for your own medical decisions. Now, I'm going to turn over the introductions of our speaker to Barbara Chabner, the Program Manager of NJCTS. Barbara?
Thanks, Kelly, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Dr. Jerry Bubrick is a senior clinical psychologist in the Anxiety Disorder Center and director of the Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder Service at the Child Mind Institute. He is a cognitive and behavioral psychologist who specializes in the treatment of obsessive-compulsive disorder, widely recognized for developing one of the world's most intensive pediatric programs for OCD. He is a pioneer in using cognitive behavioral therapy to treat children and teens with OCD and related anxiety disorders. Dr. Bubrick has provided direct patient care, supervised psychiatric residents, and trained child and adolescent psychiatrists and psychologists in the CBT treatment for anxiety disorders. He also co-authored Overcoming Compulsive Hoarding, the first book ever written on the topic. A dedicated advocate for children and their families, Dr. Bubrick is a significant public voice educating parents and teachers about the fear at the roots of anxiety and how it's effectively treated. It is my pleasure now to welcome Dr. Bubrick and turn it over to him.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Jerry Bubrick. I am a child psychologist at the Child Mind Institute, and like Barbara said, I specialize in anxiety disorders. So happy to have you with me tonight. We're going to run through a presentation and have some time for questions and answers at the end. So let's get started. A little bit about Child Mind Institute if you're not familiar with us. We are a national independent nonprofit dedicated to kids' mental health. We have kind of a research arm, a clinical arm, and a public education arm. On the clinical side, we provide world-class clinical care to kids struggling with mental health issues and learning disabilities or disorders. We've helped thousands of kids in the tri-state area, and we have several intensive outpatient programs, including my OCD program, and we have one for selective mutism, which we'll talk about later, those conditions, but we see kids from all over the world who come to us for specialized care. We also have the research division, where we're at the forefront of a lot of pioneering research. One of our largest studies right now is called the Healthy Brain Network, where we are gathering 10,000 kids to participate in the study. It's free. We actually pay them to participate. We're looking at resting state MRI, EEG, psychiatric assessment, a neurological assessment, sleep assessment, really getting a good overall clinical view of them, so that we could eventually one day be able to find biomarkers in the brain. So we would be able to identify the brain of a child with ADHD versus OCD versus a learning difference. As you know, all those conditions right now are diagnosed by symptom report only. And we have a public education campaign where we really reach millions of people through our social media outlets and our public education campaigns. We work with educators, we work with policymakers to really try to raise awareness of mental health conditions, decrease bias and stigma, and make it so that no child really has to suffer with anything, that we're able to bring treatments to scale, educate the public about what conditions are and how to get help. So it's really an amazing place to work. I've been here for 10 years and don't see myself leaving anytime soon. I love it here. So it's a good place, and I really believe strongly in the mission. Okay, so getting into anxiety, just some basic facts. Just move this off. Oh, sorry. Sorry, just make an adjustment. Okay, so basic facts about anxiety. For the past 10 years or so, there's been definitely an increase in anxiety in young people. We noticed that certainly before COVID. I would imagine now there's an even higher increase of larger increase in anxiety in kids. At some point, roughly a third of children and adolescents will meet criteria for an anxiety disorder by the time they're age 18. Yet over 80% of them will never get help and will bring those conditions into adulthood. This is not an American condition. This is a worldwide condition. Over 115 million people worldwide have suffered from an anxiety disorder at some point. And the age of onset, median age of onset for most anxiety disorders is around the age of 6. So we're seeing it slightly younger, but we're becoming better at detecting it. We're becoming better at diagnosing it, and we're certainly better at treating it than we were when I started my career 20 years ago or so. So when we look at the graph, we can see there's an overlap with anxiety disorders and ADHD and depression and other mood disorders and certainly eating disorders. And there you can see that at times that the overlap and the severity can be quite high. So when we're looking at anxiety, it's important to talk about what is anxiety. Um, Anxiety is a normal adaptive bodily system that tells us if we're in danger. It's healthy. It's our way. It's our mind's way of connecting to our body to let us know that there's trouble and we should prepare. So common symptoms that you would see in anxiety are any number of these. Starting with your skin, you might feel sweaty or shaky, your heart beats really fast. I think that's a pretty common feature for anxiety for a lot of us. Changes in your breathing, your pupils may dilate, you may have an upset stomach, or you feel like you may have to urinate a lot or maybe defecate quite a bit. um, um, you may have a dry mouth, or you might have more saliva. So there's a lot of different ways that we all feel it. We'll talk about a panic attack, which is basically like all of these at the same time. But certainly when you're in any kind of situation where your brain is detecting there might be some danger, it's normal to feel some of these symptoms, which are referred to as the fight or flight response. So what makes some kids more anxious than others? Here I usually talk about, I have identical twin daughters who are 16. They have the same exact DNA, although DNA changes over time. But yet they are wildly different people. I joke with people that they are same height, weight, hair color, hair length, but they have very different tastes in music and food and fashion, but they have to pee at the same time. So it's funny environment to live with. But so we kind of look at this biopsychosocial model that kind of helps us to explain why some kids are anxious and maybe why others aren't. We're looking at this combination of the biological predisposition, their temperament, their genetics, their physiology, combining that with their psychological characteristics, their own thoughts and feelings and behaviors, and how those things kind of coexist within their social environments. So even though my daughters have the same DNA, they have different experiences, they have different friends, they have different thoughts, and they have a different reaction and relationship with environments. So one daughter may be very anxious when the other might be very calm in one situation, and it might be reversed. And certainly if you have twins, they're never the same all the time. But we look at this, it's not just genes or just thoughts and behaviors or just their interaction with the world. It's kind of how they all overlap and intertwine together. So before we can talk about anxiety disorders and what they are and how they play out, it's important to kind of think about what are called normative developmental fears. What are normal fears for kids at certain ages? We see in ages of infancy, sudden loud noises, loss of support, being in high places, being around strangers, separation from caregivers, can cause very intense fear, but that's kind of normal. And as they age, as they get older and they mature, those things stop being scary and they don't have that fear anymore. Coming into the preschool years, we start seeing kids being afraid of animals in the dark and imaginary creatures, zombies, monsters, um, and they start having what we call anticipatory anxiety, where they're starting to worry ahead about something. Um, well, we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go further into the talk. As we get into school age kids, we're looking at specific realistic fears, how they fit in socially, how they're doing with their school, how they're going to be able to transfer to a new high school or eventually go to college, and starting to have those kinds of concerns and fears. And then when we get into the adolescent years, we start having thoughts of fears about fears, kind of the ability to think abstractly about fears. Very common for teenagers to have this existential angst of, why am I here? What's the meaning of life? We're all going to die anyways. So why do I have to do my homework? So those are kind of normal developmental fears for adolescents to have. So when is anxiety a problem? There are this is a very, if I have to think about the most commonly asked question I get about anxiety, and having been an anxiety specialist for the last 20 years, I would say this is probably one at the top. When is anxiety a problem? We look at these kind of three red flags, if you will, about how anxiety affects us: the frequency, the duration, and the impairment. So frequency means how often the symptoms come. If your child is anxious once in a while and it's not that, doesn't really affect them so much, then that's really nothing to worry about. But if it's every day or every hour or every morning or every Wednesday, that's something a little bit different to look at. The duration, how long do the symptoms last for when they come? Are they fleeting and they don't really seem to bother anybody that much? That's normal, great. But if they're kind of lasting for hours on end, that's a different story. And the impairment certainly is a big feature too, because if you have some anxiety that's there and it's lasting a while, but it doesn't really bother you, it may not be an issue. But if it really takes away from the quality of your life, affects you, prevents you from going to work or to school, or going to play dates or going to parties, a lot of resistance in doing things, then that's a big problem. Excuse me. So, kind of taking that into consideration, if I had social anxiety, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, which is essentially the fear of being perceived in a negative way, or being judged or doing something embarrassing. And I had this condition, something like this, doing a presentation for all of you would be very scary for me. I may not, the fears might be unrealistic. I might think I'm going to make a fool of myself. No one's going to take me seriously after this. They're not going to laugh at my jokes, and the anxiety might be out of proportion. I might be thinking about it, that it's going to be this catastrophic mess and it's going to be a complete train wreck. I might be overly self-conscious, that there's something on my face. They're looking at me. I can't see you guys. So you can see me. Does my shirt look okay? Do I have a stain on my shirt? Like, I'm going to be really into thinking about myself and focus on myself. These thoughts, I don't want these thoughts. They're coming in. They're bothering me. They're not going away, and it might lead me to avoid. So I might have called Barbara and Kelly and said, listen, I'm not feeling so well tonight. The audience is going to be fine without this talk. We'll do it next month. So these are the ways that the frequency, duration, and impairment kind of play out. The fears are unrealistic, out of proportion, leads to avoidance. They don't go away. You don't really have any control, and you just can't get out of your own way. So if any of those sound familiar to you, any one of those, and if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them, the more you have, the more you should be concerned and maybe be reaching out for help. Okay, so these are the different types of anxiety disorders. I'm going to go through each one, give you an idea of how the conditions play out, what they look like at home and at school, and then talk a little bit later about what parents and educators can do, in response to these conditions to help our kids overcome them. Generalized anxiety disorder. There's some interesting debate in the literature about where generalized anxiety disorder should live categorically. Right now, it's listed as an anxiety disorder, but there are some people who believe that it should be listed with the mood disorders because a high percentage of kids who have untreated generalized anxiety disorder will go on and develop a depression, some sort of depressive disorder. So some people think it's like a precursor to depression. But what generalized anxiety disorder is, these are what if kids. These are kids who just worry about everything, the chronic and exaggerated excessive worries about everyday life without real reasons to have those worries. They may worry a lot about a family's health, money, family, school, or my parents going to lose their job? What if we lose our house? What if a storm comes through and blows the house away? They tend to go to worst case scenario very quickly and expect disasters. They are very hard on themselves. So they tend to have very perfectionistic qualities. Girls are more likely to have this condition than boys, and it's roughly in 1% of the population. So what does this look like? We see a lot of worries. How am I doing in school? Even as young as I see GAD and kids worrying about grades as young as 3rd and 4th and 5th grades. If I don't get an A on in 3rd grade, if I don't get an A on my test, I'm not going to make it to a good college. So we as parents know that's ridiculous, but these kids feel so strongly about it that it's very real for them. They are very hard on themselves. They tend to be perfectionists. So, again, like if I got a 95 on a test, I basically failed it because it wasn't 100. They always seem to expect the worst. They are irritable and restless. They have disturbances with sleep. They have a very hard time falling asleep because they really can't turn off their brains. And when they lay down in bed, it's just a quieter time to worry about lots of things. So they have a hard time falling asleep. They end up falling asleep, but then sleep through the night, but then they don't get enough sleep and they're tired the next day, which doesn't help anything for anxiety and coping with anxiety if you're overtired. We're going to see somatic symptoms in a lot of these conditions. That means having headaches, stomach aches, aches and pains that are directly related from the impact of the anxiety or the stress, without necessarily having an awareness that my stomach is hurting because I'm so anxious. Kids with GAD will sometimes think in the mornings they're so anxious about going to school that day for a test that they have a stomach ache and they're pleading with their parents, I have a stomach ache, please don't make me go. I promise I'll go tomorrow when my stomach doesn't hurt. But so they're not really seeing the connection between their anxiety and how the somatic aches and pains play out. Social anxiety disorder, I kind of talked a little bit about that before in the example of how anxiety is problematic. Social anxiety disorder is not the fear of being in a social situation. I mean, it comes out in those situations, but what it really is about the fear of doing something embarrassing while in that social situation, or being perceived or judged negatively because of something they did in that social situation. So it's more about the fear of being perceived negatively than it is really about the social situation. It just comes out in that situation more. Again, the fear is disproportionate to the context of the situation. There is a performance-only subtype here where the fear is really restricted to public speaking, like what I'm doing with you now, or some sort of performance. It's very common in kids. The prevalence rates can be upwards of 7 to 10%, and it's slightly more common in boys. So what it looks like is excessive shyness. It's just easier to, I'm only going to raise my hand in class if I know for sure I have the right answer. Because if it's possible I don't have the right answer and I give that answer, it's possible someone might think I'm stupid, or they might not think I'm smart, or they might make fun of me, or they might tease me. So you see a lot of kids not really engaging in a lot of conversations sometimes when they're socially anxious, and not really participating unless they are confident they have the answer. They're not risk takers when it comes to asking questions. They tend to engage in primarily solitary activities. Again, so if I'm not, I prefer to be doing something like swimming for myself than being on a team sport, because I don't have to worry about my teammates making fun of me or being involved in that environment. I get to have my exercise, but I'm just kind of doing my own thing. They tend to isolate in social activities um, unless they're with really close friends or family. Then they're confident that they're themselves. But a lot of times when a new person comes in, or they go to their best friend's house and they didn't know that the best friend invited their cousin over, and now it's a new person, and what is this person thinking, and do they like me, do they not like me, and they're just kind of in their head worrying so much about how they're being perceived. Um, they might talk about feeling like they're blushing, or they feel like they're worrying about they're trembling over their words, or they may actually be trembling a little bit because they're just so worried. And it's very difficult for these kids to make eye contact, because that is you really are making yourself very vulnerable when you make eye contact with someone. A lot of kids just don't want to go there, so they will kind of look away, or they're looking down. And it may seem like they're not interested, so they get kind of a bad rap sometimes as not being interested socially, when it's exactly the opposite. They are very interested, but terrified they're going to make themselves look foolish. Separation anxiety is having intense anxiety when separated from a caregiver or a parent. It involves a persistent worry that something bad will happen to the caregiver or the parent in the separation. Um, so a kid might think, if you take me to school and drop me off at school, I'm going to be really worried, because what if something happens to you when we're apart? What if you get in a car accident? Or what if um, someone kidnaps you or something? So that the kid is really worrying more about the parent. Sometimes we see separation anxiety the other way around, when anxious parents drop kids off at school and don't want to separate. That's not really separation anxiety. That's more anxiety in the parent, but it's funny how it could play both ways. Most prevalent anxiety disorder in kids younger than the age of 12. Age of onset is usually before the age of 10, usually more prominent in girls than boys, and can be outgrown. So what it looks like is a refusal to go to sleepovers, camp, sleepaway camps, sometimes school, or even sometimes sleeping alone. Because what if, when we're sleeping at home, what if someone breaks into the house and hurts my family? So I'd rather be with them so we can be together, right? Um, we see a lot of reassurance seeking, which we'll talk more about later in the talk, asking a lot of questions for comfort. We see a lot of tantrums, crying, social withdrawal, and again, those psychosomatic issues of headaches and stomach aches, again, without the awareness that it's tied into the anxiety. OCD, Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder. I could talk about OCD for another full hour. It's a really fascinating condition. I love treating it. Love helping kids with it. Broken up into two parts: obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are defined as unwanted, intrusive thoughts, images, or impulses that cause a great deal of anxiety. And then compulsions are the things that people do to reduce the anxiety from those thoughts. If you think about, I grew up in Minnesota. I joke sometimes like the mosquito was like the state bird. But if you get bit by a mosquito, it itches. And to make it feel better, you'll scratch. And while you're scratching, it feels okay. But when you stop scratching, the itching gets worse. So the very thing you're doing in the moment to make it better is actually making it worse. And that's exactly how OCD works. Kids will have worries, or excessive worries about contamination, even beyond the contamination worries we have now with the pandemic, about germs or toxins. They may worry about catastrophes or bad things happening to a loved one. Excuse me. There's something called magical thinking or superstitious thinking in OCD, that somehow my thoughts will affect the fate of myself or someone else. Scrupulosity, or worrying about offending God or doing something blasphemous. Now, sometimes nicknamed the disease of doubt. And sometimes there isn't any of these kind of specific worries associated with thoughts. Sometimes I won't feel right unless I do my ritual. And then the rituals is the type of scratching. The ritual is the thing that's making it better in the moment, but actually making it worse over time. And those rituals, or we refer to as compulsions, are things like checking and, again, seeking reassurance, counting, arranging, You know, if I have to scratch myself here, I might scratch here to make that even or symmetrical. Things with tapping and touching, washing, um, but washing to the point sometimes where hands get, you know, red and cracked and bleeding in the winter. It's very sad to see sometimes. About a quarter of the cases will have onset before the age of 18. Cases in childhood are more common in boys than girls. So what this looks like is a lot of reassurance seeking. Sometimes kids may ask 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 times a day for reassurance. I touched this, I had a kid today that has a worry that if someone touches their head, they're going to have brain damage. Um, so you might get a kid coming home from school and saying, we were playing dodgeball and the ball may have hit my head. Do you think that's okay? Do you think I'm going to get sick? Am I going to have brain damage? Or is this going to make me throw up? Or, there's all kinds of questions that kids might ask. It's easy for kids to stay stuck on tasks. You might see a lot of retracing or repeating of actions. Retracing means that you're really kind of going back. So if I have a worry that maybe I left something important behind when I left the classroom, I might go back to the classroom to check. Or if I went up the staircase to my classroom on the far end of the building, if I have an obsession that if I don't go back the same way, I'll fail the next test. So even though my next classroom is on the other side of the building, I'll go back down the same staircase I went before because that's going to make the bad thing not happen. And, interestingly, most kids with OCD will say, I know this sounds ridiculous. I just feel so anxious. I feel compelled to do my rituals. So we see this excessive checking of locks and doors and windows, the stove. There's a lot of distraction and attention. It gets misdiagnosed for ADHD all the time. If I'm sitting in class and I'm thinking, did I check to make sure the stove was off when I left the house? I think I checked it, but I'm not sure. And then the teacher calls on me, Jerry, what's the answer to the question on the board? I don't know, I'm not paying attention to that. So the teacher might look like I have an attention problem. So it's really, we talk a lot about, we're not so focused on the behavior. We're trying to figure out what's driving that behavior because that's more of concern to us. You may see a lot of avoidance of triggering situations. We talked about the tapping and touching. And certainly kids who have OCD, they're thinking more than the rest of us. And so it's common for them to talk about feeling tired and fatigued a lot. Selective mutism is kind of like social anxiety on steroids for little kids. It's the fear of speaking in certain social situations or environments. Severe distress is experienced when the expectation is for them to speak. They're not being willful. They're not being oppositional. They're they're kind of, like I said before, it's just easier to not speak than it is to speak to people when there's an expectation to, when you're this anxious. It happens around the age of 5 or typically before the age of 5. A lot of times these kids are talkative chatterboxes at home where they're comfortable, and as soon as they go out into new situations or in high pressure situations, they don't talk at all. And it's not because they have a cognitive delay or they have a language delay. There's nothing. They're neurotypical. They are just highly anxious in these situations. So what it looks like is, again, these kids are really talkative at home or places where they feel comfortable. Highly restricted speech in situations where talking is expected, like the classroom. They may want to avoid situations altogether. They don't communicate needs, which is heartbreaking because we'll have a lot of kids soil themselves in classrooms because it's too anxiety provoking to raise their hand and say, I have to go to the bathroom. You can imagine this results in a lot of being teased and bullying and being ostracized, and that may also lead to school refusal behaviors. And like in separation anxiety, you can imagine how nightmarish it probably is to go into this environment and be separated from your parents. So we see a lot of difficulty separating from parents, especially in these situations. Specific phobia kind of plays out like OCD. Very similar, live in the similar part of the brain, similar symptoms, similar treatment response. But these are more specific and not as general as you might see with OCD. So these are unrealistic and excessive fears of certain situations or objects. Darkness, strangers, animals, dogs, especially take a hit here. Snakes, seeing blood, having needles, and vomit. Vomit is often the fear of vomit is, we see this more closely tied to OCD. It's sometimes referred to as emitophobia. You can imagine if, so again, going back to my daughters with the identical twins, one of my daughters freakishly likes having her blood be drawn. Like it's like she looks forward to it in a weird way. It's kind of funny. The other daughter, we need like 14 nurses to hold her down because she's terrified of the needles. But you can imagine, like, for a child who might have diabetes or has to have blood checked a lot, to not want to have 19 or 15 people hold them down isn't a pleasant experience, and it's not something they're jumping up saying, "Oh, let's go to the doctor today. I really want to be tortured." So we see a lot of avoidance in those situations. Prevalence is about 5% in kids and higher in the teens, 15, 16% in adolescents, twice as common in girls than in boys. So again, what it looks like is, again, these chronic patterns of crying and aggressive behavior, clingy, tantrumy behaviors related specifically to the being exposed to these phobias. So in general, they're happy-go-lucky kids, but as soon as you start talking about dogs, or you start talking about needles or getting blood drawn or getting a shot, these kids kind of melt down and have they don't have coping skills to deal with the high levels of anxiety and stress they feel. They may be restricted in their food. They might be super picky eaters because they don't want to have this food touch that food, because maybe if they do touch there and they're not supposed to be touching, maybe in the stomach, they'll get sick. I mean, the logic sometimes doesn't make sense, but it does to them if it means that they could reduce or eliminate the possibility that it could happen. And a lot of times these kids don't recognize that the fear is irrational. They might say dogs are to be feared. Dogs bite people, and they can show you videos of where that happens on YouTube or something, and they see this as real. So they don't necessarily recognize that their fear is irrational. Panic disorder, we talked about at the beginning of the talk. If you have all of those symptoms that we talked about with the fight or flight response, the symptoms on the right-hand side here are palpitations, increased heartbeat, sweating, shaking, feeling dizzy or faint, chest pain or tightness, feeling like you're choking or you feel nauseated. You could have all of those symptoms at the same time. Coming back to the what is it side, the second point, what's interesting in people with panic disorder and panic attacks is that they misinterpret those symptoms as the signs of a heart attack or a stroke, and they end up in the emergency room thinking they're dying. And then after that, they have a panic attack, they can have continued worries about having another one. So a lot of times, so for example, if I have a panic attack while crossing a bridge, I might think, you know what, that was highly unpleasant. I'll just avoid bridges, so I don't need to leave the city anymore. I'll just stay here. There's everything I need is here. Fine, don't worry about it, right? So, or if I, but you could maybe justify that in some weird way, but it's harder for parents to justify a kid saying, I had a panic attack in math class, therefore I'm not going back to math class because I don't want to have another panic attack. So people make that association about where it happened and think that if they go back there, it's going to happen again. Very common, very uncommon, excuse me, to see this in kids younger than the age of 14, and more common in girls than in boys. So again, we see avoidance of these situations where they think it could happen. They often fear having another attack or that they're going crazy. These kids, like kids with generalized anxiety disorder, are in the nurse's office quite a bit, or they're seeking a lot of doctor's appointments. And it's highly unpleasant to experience that, and then the worry about it happening is almost as scary for these people. Okay, so those are the anxiety disorders. So now coming into how we treat them. So overall, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the most effective treatment for the anxiety disorders. Really state-of-the-art treatments where we're looking at kind of changing looking at this, what we call this triad of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Think, feel, do. That our thoughts create feelings, Our feelings create our behaviors, and we decide to do things because of those feelings. And then how we do those things reinforces, how we feel about them. So, like if I'm have social anxiety, and I think, if I go to a party and I make a fool of myself, so I'm not going to really talk to anybody. Um, and then I choose to kind of stay in the corner, and then no one talks to me. I could say, well, see, no one was really interested with me anyways because no one talked to me. But they're not really aware, like, well, maybe they're not talking to you because you were sitting in a corner looking down the whole time and not looking super approachable. Um, but though that kind of process between our thoughts, feelings, and actions and how they intertwine is really what we're doing in CBT. Is we're looking to change that cycle. That if we can identify thinking errors, that no one is a perfect thinker. If we can identify where your thinking is um, distorted or flawed in some way, um, that we can then change how you feel and then what you do. Um, and we're helping kids face their fears rather than avoid them. I use this quote from Robert Frost all the time: the only way around is through. That we're not going to be able to overcome your fears by avoiding them. The only way we're going to overcome them is to face them. So part of what we're doing is modeling the right mindset. I love this slide. I have, if you were here with me in my office, you would see it posted all over my board behind my computer. I'm usually giving this on paper to everyone I work with. I love this slide of thinking about the right mindset. That if we're in a growth mindset, we're being very open-minded about who we are. That life is about learning and learning from mistakes. That mistakes are good; they help us grow, and we're able to be vulnerable and see vulnerability as a strength. It's really the work of Brene Brown. It's this amazing sociological researcher who looks at, she's done a lot of work in guilt and in shame and recently in vulnerability. And interestingly, she's found, and it certainly makes sense, that people who see vulnerability as a strength tend to have more loving, connected relationships than people who see vulnerability as a weakness. If you're in the growth mindset, you see vulnerability as a strength. So you would say to yourself things like, failure is an opportunity to grow. I can learn to do anything I want to do. Challenges help me grow. Feedback is constructive. I like to try new things. There's this kind of, it's not this cocky, like I'm the best in the world kind of mentality, but it's like confidence. I can do this. And if I fail, it's okay. I'll grow from that. Whereas if you're in the fixed mindset, it's more about it's more categorical. Failure is the evidence of the limit of my abilities. I'm either good at something or I'm not. I don't like to be challenged. I can't do something. When I'm frustrated, I quit. I stick to what I know, right? So we're really trying to take someone with an anxious, fixed mindset, looking at those thoughts, feelings, and actions, and helping them kind of become and grow into a growth mindset. Okay, so it's super important to understand this, what we call negative reinforcement cycle of anxiety. In psychology, we come up with fancy words for easy topics because it makes us feel important, but this is a really easy graph or a cycle to understand, really, as a parent and certainly as a teacher, how this works. So let's say that I'm Jerry and I'm a student in a school, and I'm going to give a presentation in front of the class. And it's the morning before school, and I'm thinking to myself, there's no way I'm going. I'm going to make a fool of myself. My classmates are going to laugh at me. This isn't going to go well. And I start to get really anxious. I start roping my parents in. Mom, Dad, you got to help me. I can't do this. I don't feel well. I promise I'll go tomorrow. Don't make me go today. Or I might seek a lot of reassurance from my parents. Are you sure it's going to be okay? What if I make a jerk of myself? What if someone laughs at me? And then the parent might say, oh my gosh, all right, you know what? Let's just not go today. You're too anxious. Let's just chill out for today, which makes me, Jerry the kid, feel great because now I don't have to worry about this stuff today. And my parents now get to chill out because I'm not bothering them with all my anxiety. So both child's anxiety and parents' anxiety is lowered until the next situation comes. So me as a child, all I've learned in that situation is anxiety is insurmountable. And if I complain about it enough, not in a manipulative way, but if I express it enough and I talk about it enough with someone, they're gonna take me off the hook. And so taking me off the hook becomes my really bad coping skill. So parents often become kind of like aiders and abettors, if you will, of the anxiety process by doing what they think is coming from a loving place of not wanting your child to suffer. But what it actually does is make the child more anxious over time because now you're scratching for them. Okay, so these are the kind of the ways that parents will inadvertently play a role in the child's anxiety symptoms. Participating in the child's anxiety behaviors, helping the child avoid anxiety provoking situations like the example we just talked about, changing family routines. So Jerry, if you're afraid of bridges and you don't want to have a panic attack on the next bridge, it's okay. For our next family trip, we'll just figure out a way to take tunnels instead of bridges. Right? You'd be surprised how much families will cater to kids' anxieties for the kind of the keeping the peace, if you will. Families often provide reassurance, um, which we'll talk about a little bit more at the end about why that's bad. It's really just another form of scratching. Taking on extra responsibilities, um, making changes in your own lives or in your family's lives. So we're enabling by helping the children avoid doing what they fear. But in the end, what we really want to work with parents and teachers is not helping them avoid their fear. We want to help them face their fear and manage and tolerate their anxiety in the process so they can learn to be anxious and still function instead of if I'm anxious, I can't function, which is kind of how it usually plays out. So our job is to not necessarily give them the answer or fix the problem for them. Our job is to help them face the situation and tolerate the uncertainty or tolerate the discomfort. And that's really what builds confidence and grit and perseverance and resilience, right? That I was really worried about the talk. I went, I did it. It was hard at times, but I managed to get myself through it. And you know what? I can do that again. And that's the process that we want kids to experience, but they're never going to experience that if we're allowing them to avoid the situation at all. Okay, so now we've talked about what not to do. Now we're going to talk about what to do. So helping anxious kids starts with education about anxiety and mental health. You guys can check that box off for joining the talk tonight. Certainly read as much as you can about anxiety and mental health. I always talk about with families, if you know your child has an anxiety disorder, you should educate yourself about what that condition is as if your child had diabetes. If your child was diagnosed with diabetes, you would be reading like crazy about what that condition is, how it works, what the treatments are, what to do, what not to do. But somehow we sometimes think as parents, like, well, someone will figure it out. Someone will help the kid with anxiety. So really helpful to learn as much as you can. Establishing open communication with your child, being open to interventions with school, connecting with the school, listening without jumping to solving problems. I talk a lot about in these talks about how our job as parents changes over time. That our job as parents, and when our kids are young, is to be fixers and protectors. We put little things in drawers, they can't smush fingers. We block staircases, they can't fall up or down. If something's going on at the school, we call the teacher. They want to play date, we call the parent. Falls off his bike, we patch him up and send him on his way. But at some point, the job changes. We become more like consultants, and certainly teachers fall into this role as well, where our job isn't to provide the answer to their anxiety. Our job is to help them figure out solutions for themselves. Um, so, so you know, if your child is saying, "I'm so anxious about the test," and you say, "Oh, don't worry about it. You always worry about these things, but you always do great," you're kind of in fix-it mode. Whereas if you said, "You know what? I hear you. You're really worried. What are some things you could do to feel better here?" Now we're having a conversation about thinking about coping skills and ways to get through it, and you're being more that consultant instead of the fixer. Modeling non-anxious coping strategies is super important. Your kids are sponges. They absorb everything you're doing, they listen to everything you're doing, and they learn from you. So let's say you are walking with your child and you are afraid of dogs, and you're holding your child's hand and you see a dog and you grasp your child's hand tighter, you pull them closer to you, and you walk away from the dog. What your child is learning is dogs are to be feared. Mom's afraid of dogs. I should be afraid of dogs because they're scary. They're dangerous. So instead, it's more helpful to be able to say to them, you know what? I don't love dogs. They are what they are. I don't love them so much. I'm a little bit afraid of them, but you know what? I'm gonna take a deep breath. I'm gonna walk past it and be brave. And then get past it and be like, oh, that was scary for me, but I did it. I'm so proud of myself that I did that. Now your child is learning a very different way to react to a scary situation. Excuse me. I brought that word grit up before about, getting a sense of confidence with our kids about how to foster that grit, that ability to work through problems, see challenges as something to overcome. I think about the slogan from the Marines, improvise, adapt, overcome, right? You never hear the Marines say, well, it seems too scary, we're going to pass today, right? So this idea that we want to help our kids face their fears and overcome them and manage them, because that's what's going to develop grit. So we want to promote that perseverance, but not in a controlling way. We want to help coach them through, like that example I gave about, I hear you, you're anxious. What are some things you can do here to be better? How can you face this and be strong and brave? We want to recognize and celebrate effort. If there's one thing you take away from this talk, this is the one I would highlight for you. We want to recognize and celebrate effort, not outcome. That if, again, using my daughters, they're taking the same test in science. One of my daughters studies her heart out, goes to extra help, forms a study group, is really up studying late at night, and gets a B on the test. The other daughter could care less, doesn't study, barely reads, no extra help, and gets an A on the test. As a parent, I'm going to be more proud of the first daughter because of the effort that went into it. So instead of saying, great job on your test, I love that you got that grade, it would be way better if you could say, you know what, I know you were really worried about that science test, and I'm so proud of how much effort you put into studying for it last night. That's much more motivating and much more real for the kids. And we want to recognize and celebrate failure. It's not a typo. It's supposed to say that. Going back to the growth mindset, you know what? So you got a couple wrong on this test, or you tanked this test. Okay, let's learn from it and let's try again the next time. Because, or it makes me a little crazy when kids will take a test and they'll say, I got an 85 in the test. What did you get wrong? I don't know. Well, the whole point of the test is to learn, right? So I talk to teachers a lot about when you give a test back, don't just give the grade. Have the kids go back and review what they got right and be happy about that, and what they got wrong so they could learn from that and feel like if they had to do that again, they would do better because they know what they did wrong. And certainly, we're never going to get grit by quitting. So again, this is something we can model for them, but we never quit on a bad day. And I don't even like the idea of a bad day. You could have a bad moment, you could have a bad experience, but the day is a collection of experiences. So you had one bad one, but how many good ones did you have? I don't like the idea of marking days good or bad. We talked about modeling appropriate reactions for your kid's stress. Don't be afraid to talk about your child's feelings. Don't be afraid to talk about your own feelings. It's perfectly fine for you to say, and healthy for you to say to your child, you know what? I had a rough day at work today. My boss wasn't so nice. She or he said these things to me. I kind of deserved it, but I thought about it. I took a deep breath. I thought, you know what? She's got a point. I do these things. And I kind of realized for myself I have to make these changes. So it wasn't great, but I learned from it. Imagine that conversation with your child and what your child takes away from that conversation, rather than how was work today, mom? Fine. How was your day? Fine. right? Okay, reassurance seeking. In general, it's a very confusing topic, but it's super important when we're talking about anxiety, about what to do and what not to do. A reassurance question is a form of accommodation we see in kids with anxiety, where they're seeking comfort from some outcome that they're fearing. They repeatedly ask questions they already know the answers to. And assurance is something a child doesn't know the answer to. Who's picking me up from school today? Your father is. Okay. Now, the child already heard the answer. If they're seeking a reassurance, they're saying, are you sure it's going to be him? How do you know it's going to be him? What time? You said 5 o'clock. Is it really going to be 5 o'clock? What time is dad picking me up again? So they know the answer, but they're trying to quell or kind of to eliminate this doubt or this uncertainty. Uncertainty and doubt is the hallmark. It's the core of all anxiety disorders. Difficulty tolerating uncertainty. Our job is not to give them the answer. Our job is to help them tolerate not knowing. So the reassurance provides that short-term relief, like that scratching, ends up making anxiety worse in the long run. So some examples of this: am I going to get sick from eating this? Are you sure you locked the door? Did you wash your hands? So what you can do instead is encourage them to practice being uncertain, right? Um, use lots of praise and talk about being brave. I just answered that question. I want you to be brave and go with what I said, because I don't want to say it again, right? I know this is really hard for you. I'm not going to answer that again. Hold on to what you know and do the best you can. Be brave. That's a really amazing way to respond instead of continuing to give them the answer. Prompt them to use their coping skills, give them confidence. I know you can handle, I know this isn't easy for you, but I believe in you. You can get through this. And again, praising for being brave. Again, more things that we can do. We just talked about praising efforts towards approaching difficult situations. We can certainly create reward systems for kids. We know that facing anxiety is hard. So if we can incentivize them a little bit to have rewards for facing them, then the rewards help. And over time, as the kid learns that they can face those situations and they get a sense of confidence, they don't need the reward anymore, because the reward becomes the confidence to be able to do it again. The reward is just really like training wheels to get them off the ground. We want to be a cheerleader for encouraging kids to face fears, and like we've talked about, model behaviors when appropriate. Kids who have anxiety disorders and mood disorders and learning issues thrive in structure. Try to establish family routines. Try to establish routines in the classroom. I just worked with a family this morning who, since the beginning of COVID, had like 6 moves. And one of the children just was like, I'm not having it. Every time there's a move, there's a breakdown, there's a meltdown. It's something new to get used to. And as soon as she gets used to it, there's another transition. So that's really tough. Obviously, you can't always control for that. But I think giving advance notice, hey, this is coming. If you ask kids, what time does third period start at school, it'll say like 9:27. They know that down pat because they know what to expect. But then on the weekends, things fall apart. There's no structure. So you may want to give a little bit of a itinerary for the weekend, not minute to minute or hour to hour, but like, hey, these are the things that we're doing in the morning. These are the things we're doing in the afternoon, and give a sense of what to expect. And then working with school, sometimes it's helpful for kids to have extended timelines for tests or papers, ability to use a private room for assignments or for tests, so that they don't have to necessarily worry about who's watching them and who's done first, and oh my gosh, they're done first and I'm not, and are they smarter than me, and they get super caught up in that. So having ability to do things privately can be really helpful. And then using your own coping skills. We talk a lot about you are only as happy as your least happy child, but at the same time, if you're not taking care of your own mental health, you're not going to be a very effective parent for them. And I think about the thing on the rule on airplanes. They go through the whole safety speech, and they say, in the case of emergency, the oxygen mask will come down. Place yours on first before helping a child. Right? There's a reason for that, because they want you to be in charge of yourself, because if you're not in charge of yourself, you can't help anyone else. So please, as parents, think about taking a break, doing some meditation and some mindfulness. It's okay to delegate tasks to your spouse or to your partner and just say, I need a break, or schedule in an hour or two every day for yourself, and you do tag teams with that. Really important that you take care of yourselves in order to effectively parent kids, especially kids with anxiety disorders. Just kind of wrapping up a little bit, it's also important to think about being aware of triggering events, what might lead your kid to be more anxious. Poor nutrition, not getting enough calories or nutrition in during the day, medication side effects, illnesses, transitions, unexpected things, noisy, crowded hallways. And then just in general, being more irritable or sad if they had an issue with a friend, it's going to make it harder for them to fight through and face their anxiety. They might be more likely to avoid. So just be aware of what's going on in your children's lives. And then kind of ending the general do's and don'ts, kind of a summary of today. We want to express positive and realistic expectations. We want to listen to and respect our kids' feelings. We want to help our kids tolerate the anxiety and not avoid it. We want to help them think through and be that good consultant that we talked about. And we want to model healthy ways of dealing with anxiety for ourselves. We want to stay away from avoiding things that we know might make them anxious. We don't want to ask leading questions. How was your anxiety today? Not a good question. Um, we don't want to reinforce fears or avoidance, and we don't want to give a lot of reassurance. And again, the goal of this for parents and certainly for educators is not to eliminate anxiety. Our job is to help them manage it. And that's it. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bubrick, for that really informative presentation. Lots of great information and great suggestions in terms of helping folks to manage anxiety. So we have just a couple of questions that we'll toss out to you. So someone is asking if an older child or teenager had panic attacks for several years, had therapy, and I guess then they improved. Is it possible to have them again when the person is an adult?
No idea. I'm totally kidding. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's possible. You know, it also depends on when you say the child's had therapy. Okay. So there's different types of therapy, as you all know. If someone kind of was able to go to a therapist and kind of talk about stuff and make some sense of things and kind of realized like they didn't, you know, need to be so worried about certain situations, and that made them feel more relaxed and the panic went away, that's wonderful. But if they didn't learn skills to manage the panic or know what to do when the panic attacks come, then if situation triggers the anxiety, yeah, it might come back, it might develop again. So it really, I think it depends on what kind of therapy was done, what was done in the therapy. And even with good treatment, even with good solid CBT where you're learning the skills, you could get rusty on those skills. If you haven't used those skills in a couple years and you have you know, a flare up of anxiety and you forget to use your skills, you could have a panic attack, which would then make you more worried about having another one. So the good news here is that if you were successful in treatment before, you'll be successful in treatment again. You just have to get kind of a booster, what we call a booster of those skills. Might just be a few sessions.
Okay, great. Thank you. And someone is asking about oppositional disorder. Let's see where I can find the question again. Is oppositional disorder linked to anxiety? And a second question, could anxiety be driving self-harm thoughts and lead to acting on it?
Yep. Okay. Good question. So, so there's a difference between being oppositional and having oppositional defiant disorder. Okay. It's very common for kids to have anxiety disorders and be oppositional in response, or exhibit oppositional behaviors because of the impact of the anxiety. A really good example of this is I worked with a young boy. He was probably 12 or 13 at the time. When I met him, he had just been through this really kind of intense situation at school where a kid told him that this girl in class wanted to he wanted to the kid wanted him to see a picture of this girl in a bikini, and she said, well, now she wants to see a picture of you in a bathing suit. And he got completely freaked out, highly anxious, did not want to do that, didn't know what to do, and ran out of the classroom, running down the hallways of the school, and um, got to the principal's office and the principal was kind of like blocking the door. So he kind of pushed off all the papers on the desk, and he kind of trashed the principal's office. They called 911, and he was taken to a hospital where he was diagnosed with an oppositional defiant disorder. But when I met him, I kind of walked him through, and I was like, well, what really happened? And he was just mortified that he didn't want to see this picture in the first place. And he was terrified of having to show a picture of himself. He didn't really want to do that. And he was afraid if he did that, what the reaction would be. So he just kind of lost his cool. But he was the mild-mannered, sweet kid. But in that situation, when highly anxious and having no coping skills for the anxiety, it's easy for kids to be disruptive. So I think we have to, again, not focus on the behavior, but focus on what's driving the behavior instead. And there are kids who have a true existing kind of co-occurring oppositional defiant disorder with anxiety. But I think that would be that the oppositionality is completely separate from the anxiety. The kid could be completely calm and not anxious and breaking a lot of rules and being argumentative, and there's nothing as his or her fault. So I think that those two things could coexist. I lost the second part of the question. What was the second part?
Give me 1 second. We'll come back to it.
I had it in the beginning. I lost it.
Could anxiety be driving self-harm thoughts lead
right.
to acting on it?
Yep. So again, there is a self-harming kind of condition, and there's self-harming that could be in response to anxiety. So again, we're not so focused on the behavior, even though self-harm is scary. We're looking more at what's driving the behavior. I have a young man who I'm working with now who has OCD, and anytime there's a conflict in the situation, there's yelling, or there's some sort of conflict at school, there's a debate, and he's getting very anxious because he's worrying, did I say something that made them kind of react? And he's thinking it is his fault. And he starts to then hit his head really hard so that everyone stops doing what they're doing and focuses on him. And then the hitting himself stops the tension from happening. So that's an example of where the anxiety could lead to it, but it's not because there's an intention to hurt themselves. The intention is to stop the anxiety from happening. Whereas someone who has self-injury behaviors because they're depressed is a different entity. So when we're talking about cutting or scratching or some sort of self-injury that's unrelated to a specific anxiety, it's more about mood. Kids are self-injuring for one of two reasons. They're either self-injuring because they're so overwhelmed with emotion that they can't think straight, so that cutting themselves or something gives them something to focus, the pain gives them something to focus on instead of all the madness in their minds, or they are feeling so numb that they don't feel anything, so cutting or injuring themselves the pain gives them something to feel. So again, I think it's not just the behavior that we're looking at. We're really trying to figure out what's driving that behavior, and treating what's driving it is more important than looking at just the behavior itself.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have just a couple of other questions. So one is someone is asking about someone who is a 13-year-old girl diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, but also has other symptoms of some of the other anxieties you described, such as fear of vomit, needles, panic attack, separation anxiety. And the question is it normal to have overlapping anxiety symptoms?
Yes, it's normal to have, it's rare that someone just fits perfectly into one box and doesn't have any symptoms of anything else. And just because you have symptoms of other things doesn't mean you have those conditions, right? So in order to meet the criteria, I didn't go through like specific diagnostic criteria with you in each of these conditions, but in order to meet criteria for each of these conditions, you have to meet several different steps. I usually talk about like a cough is a good example. A cough could be a symptom of an allergy. It could be a symptom of the flu. It could be the symptom of um, diabetes. It could be the symptoms of cancer. Just because you have that symptom doesn't mean you have all those conditions. It just means you have a symptom. Um, so I think while it's normal to have other anxiety with GAD, it doesn't mean she has all these other conditions. But the good news is it doesn't really matter because the treatment is so effective, and it's a lot of the same skills and strategies that we teach for the think, feel, do, um, that a good, solid CBT clinician would be able to treat all those different symptoms.
Okay. I have another question. Do you have any advice for those who obsess with their grades when they have a 4.0 GPA?
Yep. Well, again, I would ask them, what are they worrying about? Are they worrying that if they get if they have a 3.98, that they're not going to get into they won't have the same options as if they had a 4.0? And for someone who's has a 4.0 and worrying about it is probably spending an excessive amount of time studying and doing the work to get there. And I would say, well, if you're spending 3 hours a night, 4 hours a night when in your homework, and they're probably laughing at me saying that's nothing. They're probably spending 6 or 7 hours a night on their homework. But if you're spending that much time and you're getting the A's, is it possible that some of that time is overkill? And you could actually still get the A's by spending 4 hours instead of the 6. So why don't we take a chance, spend less time, and see what happens? Because wouldn't it be nice to have an extra 2 hours of the day to do something else? So I think I would try to find ways to challenge them, not by saying that they're wrong or that this is the better way to do it. I would challenge them to take risks that maybe there's another way to do this that could still be productive for them.
Okay, and here's another one. How can you help a young child figure out what is worrying them if they are feeling anxious but don't know why?
Yeah. It's a really good question. A lot of times kids will say, I'm anxious, and parents will say, what are you worrying about? And the kids say, I don't know. And it's this kind of cyclical conversation of why are you worrying? I don't know. Well, then how you know it's worry? And that's not helpful. And even certainly as we talked about in OCD specifically, kids might have these worries or have these anxieties, and not necessarily because there's a reason, but just because they won't feel right unless they do the rituals. So, and certainly I would expect this with younger kids to not necessarily have the emotional maturity or articulate the actual feelings that they're having or be able to talk about those feelings. It might be bigger than they're able to talk about. So I wouldn't be so focused on what they're worrying about. I would be more focused on how to help them learn to be um, to learn to overcome their feelings and how to function while anxious instead of often thinking I can't do anything if I'm anxious. So I would be more focused on coping skills to power through it than I would be to try to figure out what it is exactly.
Okay, and we do have actually a number of additional questions, but in the interest of time, I'm going to pose one more, and then those questions that have not been answered will be answered in the blog post that Dr. Bubrick will do following the webinar. So the last question that I'll pose for tonight is someone is asking about sleep worries. So any suggestions on how to manage when kids are concerned about sleep and they start talking about it, before when the bedtime routine gets started, and they start asking if the parent will stay with them or will sit with them for an hour, or those kinds of things.
Yep. Yeah, very, very common questions. Again, what I would say in general is that we want to help do this in steps. So we don't want to just go cold turkey and say, I'm out of your room, figure it on your own, and then have the kid, we're not Ferberizing here this way. But we are interested in scaling it back slowly. So we would talk about, is there something specifically the kid is worrying about? I had once a kid who was terrified to sleep in his own bed and slept with the parents a lot. Because his older brother told him that sometimes sharks will come out of the toilet and find his way into the room and eat him. So we just made a sign on the door, no sharks allowed, and that solved it, right? So sometimes the answer is super simple. You just have to know what you're facing. But if the child's afraid of, a lot of times the child might be afraid of burglars coming in or robbers coming in or someone's going to kidnap them. So we want to give them a lot of skills during the daytime and talk about those things during the daytime, so that they can use those skills at night. But if it's just kind of like a general, I just don't feel comfortable on my own, I want to sleep with my parents, then we set up structures and systems for the parents so that parents can, stay with the child at night at bedtime, sitting at either the foot of the bed or maybe at the mid side of the bed. No touching, no affection, no nothing. That was all done before. Now it's lights out. I'll be here for a certain amount of time, a half an hour, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and then I'm going. And you can, if you stay in your bedroom the whole night, you earn 2 stars in the morning. If you got up once to come get me, then when I walk you back, there's no affection, there's no talking, there's no nothing. Put the kid back to bed. You sit at the foot of bed again for 10 minutes, then leave. And if they can stay on their own bed the whole night, they get 1 star, and they can trade in stars for prizes. So we're using those rewards, and every kid has a slightly different system with rewards, but we're using those rewards as incentive for them to be brave and stay through the night, because we know that as they continue to do that, I did that once, I could do it again, and they do it again and again and again, then being able to sleep on their own feels really good. We don't need the rewards as much. But we really have to make sure that parents are on board with being consistent, because if you do this well for a couple nights and then you cave and you fall asleep with your kid, on the 5th night, you've just offset everything and now you have to start over from zero. So it's not just the kids, it's having a connection, having a partnership with the parents and the kids, that this will be the consistent plan.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that answer and all of the great information that you provided tonight. As I said, in the interest of time, I think we will end the questioning here, but those questions that have not been answered will be answered in the blog post. I'd also like to call your attention to the handouts on your the dashboard. I believe it is the PDF of the slides, so that you can have them if you want to access them later. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you very, very much to Dr. Bubrick, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, who will wrap things up for the evening.
Thank you for joining our webinar on when to worry about your child's worries. There is an exit survey which we need everyone attending to fill out. The webinar blog is open now and available for the next 7 days on the NJCTS website for any additional questions that were not covered in tonight's presentation. That website is www.njcts.org. Also, an archived recording of tonight's webinar will be posted to our site. Our next presentation, The Importance of Play, will be presented by Dr. Colleen Daly Martinez and is scheduled for April 21st, 2021. This ends tonight's session. Thank you, Dr. Bubrick, for your candid answers, and thank you, everyone, for attending. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.